So I'm going to have to apologize for this video. You can probably already hear why that is. Yesterday I spent quite a bit of time giving a presentation regarding tabletop games, actually. The proper usage of setting, ambiance, music, characterization, and other aspects like that for about 10 hours. So I was recovering from a sore throat, and I knew I would screw up my voice, and I have. I sound like Linda Young from Dragon Ball Z, the voice actor of Frieza, for people who don't know who that is. And for people who don't know who that is, I'm going to put a little video clip when this video goes up on my YouTube channel, Zenthanol. But there's two reasons why I wanted to do this live today, despite the fact that my voice is so bad. One is because the show must go on, and I like to reach out and talk to people, and I'm getting new followers and new people every day. You know, New York Lifted just joined here, hello. So I like to talk with people, and people always have questions and cool things to talk about. So that was one reason. The other reason is because my passion fruit wine just got racked to secondary, which means that for those who don't know how to homebrew or any of that nonsense, it just means that you take the primary fermenter, primary fermenter here. Well, that's the secondary now, but you take the liquid out of one, and then you put it into the other. The reason why you do that is because once the yeast, or whatever, well, in this case yeast, is fermenting the sugars, they collect at the bottom, and so does like detritus and other sorts of things. So you basically just take a siphon and you siphon off the liquid, and you know, it's not a lossless process. You do lose some liquid volume because you lose it to the dregs. When people talk about drinking from the dregs or you're scraping the bottom of the barrel, like that's kind of the sort of silty, yeasty, like musty stuff that's at the bottom. Nobody wants to drink that. So you just siphon off the good liquid off of that. You don't shake it up or else it'll get all everywhere and you have to wait. So that's happened. It took a long time to ferment, and it's pretty nice. I'm going to try it again right here. It's quite nice. For anyone who hasn't had passion fruit before, it's a tangy, sort of acerbic fruit. The actual flesh is sort of gooey and yellow, pretty much the color of this liquid here. And definitely that flavor has been imparted into this wine, as you would expect. And because it's so acidic and tangy, the yeast took a lot longer to sort of start up, and it also took a lot longer for it to ferment to what's called dryness, which is when you take all of the sugar so you take sugar and yeast and the fruit juice or whatever you're doing to make your wine, and you put it all in one area, and then you in your vessel, and then the process happens, right? The yeast, eat the sugar, and they excrete CO2 and alcohol, and then you siphon it off in the secondary. You could also put other stuff in the primary and in the secondary, but I just didn't do that. I neglected to do it this time. So I just decided not to. Oh, we got some questions here. Do you have your PCA? That's the pest control, or pest control advisor license. I'm assuming you're talking about Tyler Leidig. Cow poly, slow, plant protection, fruit crop production represent. Cool. I always love talking to people like that. No, actually, I don't currently have a PCA. I had a rough patch in my life, and I wasn't able to do the continuing education so I don't have it anymore. However, I don't let that keep me from making the videos that I do and the content that I do, because the information's still here, and I think it's really unfortunate that there are so little people who have it. But I'm glad that people like yourself do have it and can go out and help people. San Luis Obispo in particular, I was there. I used to go there a lot, actually. I used to go there quite a bit, and I'm very impressed with the what do you do, Mr. Hemp Lord? I do a lot of things, but I do consultation. It's actually kind of cool that you guys are talking about both of these things at the same time. So I have some people that employ me in greenhouses to do pest control work. Interesting that you guys had those two questions. I'll bring it up. I'll put it to other people who might be watching this, and eventually they will be watching it on my YouTube channel. So, if you're not employed by like an agricultural entity, like I don't know, like a flower grower, not a cannabis flower grower, but let's say they grew like, I don't know, roses or lilies perhaps. And if you are employed by them, you don't have to have a PCA, which is a pest control advisor license. That's what the PCA stands for. You don't have to have that to like render like decisions about, as long as they're lawful, to render decisions about what to do and how to do things in the greenhouse with regards to like pest control. If you are not employed by them, then you do. You can't just be going around being like, I think you should do this, I think you should do that, because if you don't have, and it makes sense, because if you don't have the educational background for it, then you can really mess people up who would otherwise not know. And it's sort of meant to be like a litmus test for people. But it's actually, in my opinion, it's actually kind of difficult to get. It's a really important thing. It's like, I'm not trying to say that like, it's not like, oh, we need more doctors, let's lower the standards. Honestly, the standards should be high. But I feel like there aren't really that many people who are in the business who work as PCAs that are quite successful. It really takes a lot of support and a lot of, I guess you could say, like, what's the word? I'm struggling to come up with the word, but essentially you want to have quite a base. You have to know a lot of people for that to work out. Yeah, so it's stacked against cannabis growers, right? For example, for a long time, people have been growing cannabis don't have that that opportunity to utilize PCAs, and they don't have the opportunity to utilize really great resources that farmers typically did, like people in Riverside, people in San Luis Obispo and Davis. You know, these really great folks who work in agriculture, who, like, if you had a pest problem, you can just go in and be like, hey, what's this problem? And they can, for free, they'll just take it and they'll identify it for you. Because people realized that it works out to the country and the state's benefit if you subsidize intellectuals who have this information. If you don't, if you make it really competitive, then people are going to treat it like that game. And they're going to, like, hold all this information back, and they're not going to let other people succeed and find that information out. Could you imagine how terrible it would be if, like, it was super secret knowledge how to get rid of powdery mildew, or it was super secret knowledge how to, like, or how it even works? Like, that would be atrocious. People would be, new farmers, or people taking over old farms, or people who are trying to be employed in agriculture are, they're not going to have those resources. And it's part of the reason I think, obviously there's a lot of factors to consider, but I don't think it did any favors by, having the prohibition. Tons of people I know in the UC system were totally supportive, but they know that if they were to use their official resources to help out somebody who had a problem with cannabis, it could lead to quite a problem. So they wouldn't be able to help out. But a lot of those things are going to be changing. I have already changed. Yeah, spray milk, right. Yeah, good idea. Yeah, UCIPM. Yeah, it's out there. People who don't know that already, the UCIPM YouTube channel and also the UCIPM website is an incredibly great resource. But if you want some personal 101 action, they didn't have that for a long time. So yeah, I wish I could just share resources away with others. I don't understand what that sentence means, actually. I did not interpret that. Yeah, I got my voice. The more I talk, it's probably gonna get worse, so hopefully you guys can bear with it. How do you get rid of powdery mildew, asks, what's your name? Big Al the Grower, right, Big Al. Oh, and my channel, of course, right, yeah. But yeah, UCIPM. There's also other IPM websites. Different states, different people manage them, whether they're associated with the state or not. There's a lot of specialists out there who have websites and that sort of a thing, and it's really cool. It's sort of I'd say it's a discipline that's sort of small and has a pretty sizable level of camaraderie. Maybe not a large community, but a lot of camaraderie, and people tend to know people quite a bit. The cannabis industry needs more Matthews. Well, I appreciate that. I think that's somewhat true. I'm gonna have the rest of this stuff. I'll drink to that. Oh, maybe not the best thing to have when you have a sore throat. It actually went down pretty smooth, to be honest. So I think a lot of people. There needs to be a lot more Tylers too. To be honest, a lot more people who are vetted and have licenses and are out there helping people. For sure. Because the more that sort of educational information is broadcast correctly, the more people are not going to find things like powdery mildew and other sorts of things to be a problem. Which reminds me, I didn't answer that question from Big Al the Grower. How do you get rid of powdery mildew? Well, that depends on what crop you're growing. So this is kind of a great segue into why I asked so many dang questions. Because at the end of the day, you can't just go around and just say, do this, do that, necessarily. I mean, you can, but you're not going to necessarily give people the correct information because your context is very important. And that's why I mention that so much. Detroit Cultivar says, in your opinion, what do you think the most effective way to kill and prevent spider mites on cannabis is? Again, context dependent. Yeah, you're welcome, Tyler. Absolutely. Yeah, I think, I just think it's really important that the people are out there giving that educational information out and helping growers out. Whether you grow cherries or tomatoes, or whether you grow cannabis or tobacco. I mean, people have contentious opinions about that, or cotton or soybeans or whatever. People need those intellectual resources, and a lot of times they're kind of esoteric, which is the entire impetus for my content. Because they're esoteric, and sometimes they're behind paywalls, and they use complex terminology, which even I'll still use in the video or the documents or whatever I'm using to illustrate a point. I'm so happy I finally caught you live. Well, thanks. I'm trying to do it at different time periods and things like that, so people have different opportunities, because everyone has a different schedule, including myself. So yeah, I've definitely I've been asked at least 2 questions and I haven't mentioned them, but yeah, for spider mites, right? Avid and fluoromite are highly effective. They're also incredibly illegal, so don't do that. But that's the problem right there, is that you have people who will go out, or you probably still do, that don't associate with such people. But yeah, on the forums, that's what people would say, is just use this fluoromite, use this Avid, use this abamectin, this myclobutanyl, use this malathion. And it's not good, it's not healthy. It's hazardous to your health. But that's why you want people who are licensed. You want people to be giving out pest control advice, be advisors who have this sort of backing, so it's not just any old person. And even if it was any old person, you want somebody who has that information and can. That's why I always cite academic literature, because it's not just me saying it. It's other people who are qualified, who have done laboratory assessments about certain qualities of pesticides or qualities of certain biocontrol agents, or that understand and have sort of created a resource for like the life stages or the life cycle of certain pests, so you can understand them better. And if you know your enemy, you know yourself, you know your situation, your context, you can make that change, and you can have a plan going forward. For example, Cannibalist Gardens asked here, do you know if spinosad has been added to the banned list? If I were to just take that statement without any context, without knowing Cannibalist Gardens or anything like I do, somebody in Colorado might ask that question and be way different than somebody in California asking that question, right? And then the time period, right? Because today is the 11th, it's the 4th of November, which is the 11th month in 2018. But if we go back 5 years, that's way different, right? That doesn't even make sense as a question, necessarily. Big Al the Grower says spinosad is not legal to use in California for cannabis. It is, however, legal to use in other crops. And that's another thing that PCAs know. PCAs should know, at least, that pesticides are labeled for different crops. So like for one crop it might be possible, and for another crop it's not. Little known fact, California is the only state that requires efficacy data for registration. Isn't that surprising? You would think it would be many more states, but no, it's actually not the case. Pesticide companies have whole divisions like focus on California in particular when it comes to registration. At least in the United States, obviously. Yeah, so anyways, that's so to answer the question, or to kind of not answer the question, what's best for you depends on your resources. It depends on what your plan kind of is already, if you have one. Which you should, because the California, in cannabis at least, in California, you're supposed to have an IPM plan already. If you don't, that's literally illegal, technically. So, depending on what your plan is, what your resources are, what you're trying to accomplish, how big you are, those are all contexts to consider when it comes to what the best approach is. And also how bad the infestation is. Yeah, so I see a lot of people aren't a big fan of spinosad not being allowed. Oh, reconnecting. Okay. Hold. Come on. Do what you're supposed to. Oh well, that's fine. That's good. I'll just reposition. Yeah, how ridiculous is that? Isn't spinosad Omri? I heard Azamax is no longer approved either. Why is it illegal? Azamax is legal for use on cannabis, says Big Al. But don't use azotrol because it has bifenthrin, which is another chemical compound you don't want to be using. Oh man, my voice sounds terrible. I don't blame anyone for not listening to this to this live stream. But it's gonna be funny to like come back later and like listen to my own voice, which sounds terrible. Yeah, so Cannibalist is saying that Azamax is the most effective way to knock down mites, and probably follow up with fatty acids, which could be any sort of product that contains that as a product, as an active ingredient. But yeah, so I'll try to fix this again. Oh well. Yeah, MP'd is something of that distinction with the fatty acids. But yeah, so like some people might say that Persimmilus would be a better method to getting rid of spider mites, especially if you like don't have a ton. And if somebody has the resources and money for it, it might make sense to utilize Persimmilus weekly or bi-weekly or something like that. I know ornamental growers who use Persimmilus in lieu of like chemical pesticides to utilize to attack spider mites. However, if you didn't have those proclivities, you might do something else instead. Let me try this instead. Let's see. Guess not. I guess this is just not going to work for me, huh? It's not going to work. Oh well. Yeah, and then you got people who are like, hey, just use prevention. Prevention is the best way. Prevention is a good way, and a lot of people don't appreciate how important prevention is. But prevention works right up until the point it doesn't. And then once you have a problem, you're obviously going to have to treat it. And that's where treatments come in line. I'm definitely a big advocate of preventative controls and preventative treatments and preventative management in IPM. But people have to recognize that unless you're growing and even if you were growing in a hermetically sealed clean room, which most people aren't, and you shouldn't be expected to, no other agricultural product really is, you're going to run into pests at some point, statistically speaking. And if you never do, then you never do. But why would you risk that and not have a plan? It just doesn't make any sense to me, you know? I've been talking about predators, cannabis. I was just talking about Persimmilus. But yeah, so for spider mites, there's other predator mites like Californicus, Persimmilus. There's Occidentalis that people utilize too. Cannabis says prevention is great, except mites are constantly evolving to withstand your preventative citrus. I assume you meant a different word there. Well, like, I mean, things are constantly evolving. That's why you rotate. That's why you use, if you're going to use like a chemical compound, whether that's a synthetic chemical compound or a bioinsecticide or a biomiticide or a bioacaricide or a biofungicide, you want to rotate your controls. It's commonly said, and even people who I personally respect in the integrated pest management area, that believe biocontrol, there's no such thing as resistance to biocontrols. Well, that's not really true. It's not. All of your control techniques, like, this is going to sound a little bit harsh, I suppose, but you're only killing the ones that are susceptible if you only use one treatment. They're susceptible to that one treatment anyways. And if you don't rotate and you don't mix it up, you don't change things, or at least you don't have a plan that's holistic, then eventually you're going to have the Darwin's finches scenario, the Galapagos Islands, in which different, if you consider greenhouses or indoor grows or outdoor grows, different spaces to be like islands, then you're going to have this sort of adaptation in those areas, and then those mites or those pest organisms are going to adapt to the pressures, whether those are predators, whether those are chemicals. A lot of pests are particularly good at being pests because they're able to deal with xenobiotics. They're able to deal with chemicals that they interact with, maybe with the plant's immune system or whatever that they're exposed to. And they're able to adapt. A lot of them have genes that are, that's exactly what they are for, is for dealing with compounds externally or internally, but they're dealing with external compounds that they come into contact with, and they're able to neutralize or sequester or do whatever with. So that's why they're good at like being pests, and so to like neglect that is not helpful for treatment in the long term. And then just like people have been doing for decades, and in some cases you don't have any good biocontrol agents for certain pests too. Some people don't realize that there are not always biocontrol agents that are approved. There are not biocontrol agents that even exist that are like marketable or commercially feasible to raise. So you run into that problem too. And then you have to use a chemical compound, or you're just going to get destroyed by this like plague of this pest, depending on where you live. Flea beetles are a big problem in rapeseed oil production, for example, and just rapeseed in general. So you recommend alternating between like Swirsky and Cucumeris, for example, for thrips control. Yes, I mean, depending on like environmental factors and things like that. But you should probably be a little bit more, when you do your rotations, you might want to use something like an entomopathogenic fungus instead of like another predatory mite, because the differences between Swirsky and Cucumeris are small in comparison to an entomopathogenic fungus or a natural chemical. By which, when I say natural, I mean like a botanically derived chemical that's going to be way different than a predatory mite. And so when you do your rotations, you want to use like very different but still effective treatments in order to sort of curtail the adaptation of a pest to control measures. Big Al mentions PFR 97 and an azo tank mix, like for example. Yeah, and then like also what's really common to do in ornamental horticulture and agriculture is to like tank mix different pesticides, whether they're chemicals or biopesticides or whatever. I have a funny anecdote about that. I was working with these people, and man, I just do not like having to keep this camera up. Oh well. I'll make do. I'll give this anecdote first. So, I was working with these guys, and they didn't understand why Beauveria bassiana wasn't working. Beauveria bassiana is an entomopathogenic fungus that you can use for thrips, and you can use for a bunch of different other organisms besides thrips. And they were tank mixing it with a fungicide. And Beauveria bassiana is a fungus. Now, not all fungicides kill Beauveria bassiana necessarily, and there are companies that produce Beauveria bassiana as a commercial product and then tell you what you can and can't tank mix it with. But these people were tank mixing a very broad spectrum fungicide chemical with their Beauveria bassiana, and they weren't sure why the Beauveria bassiana wasn't working. So, that kind of stuff happens. And, like, that was like, when you figure, and this was in California, right? So, yeah, one, read the label, whether you're a PCA or not, you need to read that label, you need to know that label. It's a legal document. You need to understand it, right? What was the fungicide being used? It was some sort of triazole or triamazole. It was, it's been a while. This was in ornamental horticulture. We were growing roses. It was triflumazole, I think. Something like that. It was a really broad spectrum fungicide. And they used it quite a bit. It might have been Safari. Or, like, I think that was the brand name. So, yeah, it's like, it was not smart. And, like, these people have been doing this for 30 years. Some of these guys have been working at that greenhouse for 30 years. Solid. They didn't work there for like 10 years and then went somewhere else and then came back. For most of their adult life, they've been working at this company, and they still didn't have that really basic knowledge. This next generation, people my age, people younger than me, people a little bit older than me who are coming into the ag space, ready and understanding of this sort of stuff, they're just like fundamental, basic level of knowledge is so much higher than their predecessors. It does kind of give me a warm feeling inside to know that although we're small and there's not very many people going into agriculture, a lot of people, that do care do seem to be quite a bit more educated, and that's because I think a lot of them are way more passionate. So it works out for them, and I hope that it works out for those people. Unfortunately, however, agriculture is kind of a hard business to get into and do well in for myriad reasons. Not the least of which being economic. Can you share with us your favorite method of controlling powdery mildew, since I have been dodging the question and forgetting that it existed for cannabis? And your exact question is for controlling it. So, if you're outdoors, there's not a whole lot you can do. You're going to be very, it's not a very satisfying question, but some of the best things that you can do is to try to grow in a place where you're not going to get the temperature and humidity changes necessarily. And that might sound like a cop-out, and it kind of is, because you don't necessarily know what's going to happen in the future where you're growing. So from an environmental perspective, some places are just going to either have much more powdery mildew or it just ambiently in the environment, or they're going to have an environment due to the climate, the local climate, that's going to be more or less, that's going to induce sporulation more or less during the seasons. Greenhouses are also kind of like this too. Although with a structure you do have a little bit more control. Although when you ventilate you're going to have that problem as well. So from an environmental standpoint, you're going to run into those problems. But then moving into so that's like prevention, right? If you're in an indoor setting, you're just going to have that much more of a defense, for lack of a better term. It is a little bit hard to talk, so I have to choose my words carefully. Oh, there we go. Right, so you do run into that problem. Depending on how you're growing and where you're growing, that's going to dictate some of what you can and cannot do. But that's mitigating preventatively. You can also apply different biofungicides, which are going to be registered differently in different states, depending on where you grow. You're talking from California, so you have different possibilities there. A lot of people do like to use sulfur, elemental sulfur. You shouldn't burn sulfur, but there's micronized sulfur that you can utilize, although you should probably not utilize that in flour for obvious reasons, right? There are biofungicides that a lot of people do suggest, but I haven't had a whole lot of efficacy with them personally. But I know people who have. So, I don't really have an answer for that. Sometimes the infection is much more egregious. I will say that crop scouting is quite important, though. Getting the information that you have an infestation to begin with early is very important. And that doesn't matter what treatment or preventive measure that you're using is. This is a preventive measure. And also, not only crop scouting effectively, but then also knowing how much of a problem it is in the first place. How big is your infestation? Because that's going to dictate what you do. And even if it's really salvageable, if you have a huge swath of powdery mildew as an infestation in your growing space, it's not like you're going to remediate that necessarily, especially if you're at the end of your growth cycle. If you're at the very tail end, things are going to be a lot worse for you in that way. And I have been ignoring all of these wonderful comments, people talking about xeritol and silica and micronized sulfur. Yeah, I'm glad that you had good success with xeritol. I've had good success with xeritol too, and then I've also had bad success. And sometimes that same group that I talked about that had the tank mixing problem, they also, I've told this story before, but they were also spraying a fungicide for powdery mildew. It was Pageant. It was pyloclostrobin, which is a pretty effective fungicide, but not something you should use in cannabis. And they weren't seeing efficacy, and they were like, "Oh no, is it resistant?" No, your sprayers just don't know how to spray. But culturally, at the company culture, nobody was going to say, "Oh, I think maybe I didn't spray it right," because they would get lambasted and they would get fired. So nobody's going to be honest with the growers, with the cultivation staff, because they're afraid for their jobs, which is toxic and unhealthy and unfortunate. But so knowing that could be a possibility, but knowing that I couldn't just go up to somebody and say, "Hey, how did you spray it?" because they would take it offensively and they would get defensive. I called up the local representative and I was like, "Hey, I think we might have a resistant strain of powdery mildew. Can you check this out?" And they said, "Oh yeah, we can send a person, but they seem to deal with this often, the sort of machismo that you have to deal with. And they found that, in fact, the fungicide did work, again, magically. So, you gotta watch out for how you're spraying and how you're applying the pesticide. And read the label and know that if it says reapply it multiple times, that you're reapplying it multiple times. That also goes into the context of treatment, and why it's so important to give context and have records. Because if somebody tells me, "Oh, xeritol didn't work," and no other information, I have no idea. I have no idea what that means. Does that mean that you sprayed it one time and that's it? Did you spray it effectively? I don't know. I haven't been here. So you have to give all that information. It's why an on-site evaluation is so important. It's why assessing records is so important for those reasons. Airflow is important. Do not burn. Do not burn sulfur, at all. Just don't do it. How do you feel about sulfur burn? Don't do it. Crop scouting is the best thing. I'm glad that you do it. Oh, why do you recommend vaporizing sulfur? Because you shouldn't burn sulfur, because the sulfur dioxide is really, really toxic. It's incredibly toxic for you, and the residue is incredibly toxic, and it's pretty sure not allowed. Pretty sure you're not supposed to do it. I haven't been keeping up, but I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to be burning sulfur in general, at least in California. But I think that's also the case in other places too. Maybe there are special cases for viticulture, I think, maybe. But you should definitely check into that. And check people like Tyler out and other people who have PCAs. Ask them, ask the university's systems. Extension agents are always there also to help you out with that sort of thing too. Because sometimes my information is outdated as well. Nobody's perfect. But check those resources out. But it's very important to Crop Scout. I appreciate that. If you take one thing away from this live stream, if you don't Crop Scout, Crop Scout. If you don't record your information, and I mean digitally, because nobody's going to look through paper records, do it. If you want help with that, professionally, I can assist you with that. And boy, does my voice suck. I told myself today I was going to not talk, and then I'm like, I'll just go on a live stream. Sounded like Frieza from Dragon Ball Z. Why do you not burn sulfur? Oh, super toxic. I wasn't aware. Yeah, you should look up what happens to sulfur when you burn it. it creates there's a chemical from the pyrrolization called sulfur dioxide. Actually, when you vaporize sulfur, or when you use sulfur not through burning, when elemental sulfur makes contact with like mites, for example, or fungi, and also depending on the temperature, has a factor here. The mere contact with the exoskeleton or the mycelium of powdery mildew is a chemical reaction, causes a chemical reaction rather, and it literally burns on contact for that reason. It's kind of like why hydrochloric acid, just by its nature, burns you on contact because of your skin and the way it's composed and what the chemical reaction is, and the way that compound reacts with the chemical makeup of your skin is similar, not chemistry-wise, but similar in sort of like, as an example, as to like how sulfur can be very terrible when it comes to contact with like fungi. That's why it works, and that's why resistance isn't really a problem, because something very fundamental, many somethings very fundamental are going to have to change about fungal biology and physiology for sulfur to be resisted in that way, if that makes sense. Yeah, so I have inhaled a whole lot of burned sulfur over the years, and I'll pay for it later. Yeah, I have. This is going to sound a little bit much, but I have been both intentionally exposed to pesticides, and that's a story for another time when I have more vocal range, and my expletives won't sound so terrible. Vaporizing sulfur is super effective. I have to say I'm disappointed to find out that it creates a toxin. Well, I mean, like, pesticides are toxic, right? Like, by definition, they're supposed to be poisonous. But I guess you meant for, like, humans. But our physiologies aren't really that different from insects. I mean, they are, but, like, the fundamental things that work are toxic for a lot of the same reasons. We have a similar enough fundamental physiology for those compounds to affect us deleteriously. And I have been exposed to pesticides without knowing, and that really pissed me off. And it's happened several times at different locations, and also on purpose. And well, that was definitely an interesting situation. Somebody wants to go live with me. What? Okay. Yeah, Big Al, it works really good. I was sad to stop using it. All right. So far, the screen is dark, unfortunately. It's not. Are you connected? Are you there? Oh, that's unfortunate. Well, you're welcome. You're welcome. I hope that this live feed has been helpful. Well worth the straining of my voice to be there for people, to ask questions, answer questions, even if it's a little bit roundabout. But yeah, sulfur burning is very effective, but like there's a cost, unfortunately. Yeah. You're very welcome. Yeah, and I'm glad that nobody's taken this like super offensively or anything. You wouldn't believe the sort of like reactions I get from some people, even like fellow people in like the entomological community or the botanical community. Not so much there though, where people like, or like the cannabis community, like some people, they get very offended and upset that the sort of information I give out for free, they're trying to charge people for. Now, I mean, that's how I make my living too. I do work with grows, go to Humboldt, I'm going to Las Vegas in a few weeks. Might be even going to the United Kingdom. in the future. So that'll be kind of cool if that all works out. So, I mean, like, that's what I do too. But, like, I also give out a lot of information because the kind of information you should pay for, or, I mean, not should, but have to pay for, tends to be, like, things that you can't, like, I can't, like, replicate those things in, like, a YouTube video. What you're paying for is somebody's eyes. You're paying for somebody to evaluate a site. You're paying for somebody to identify something. You know? And a lot of people have, like, subsidized that free information with, like, tipping me on PayPal or supporting me on Patreon. And I really appreciate when people do that because that content's always going to be free, or at least as close to free as I can make it. But, you know, you got to make rent. You got to make money. You got to subsist in this world. If I got like an $1,000 or like $1,200, $1,500 stipend every month, you know, I would be way better off. Just like I would have basically all of my amenities like paid for, and I wouldn't have to worry about money nearly in the same way. I would still be professional, and I would still try to help people out professionally because having a professional relationship is important as well. But I do also like to give that information out freely. General information is not as valuable as a specific plan. Right, exactly. You know, like hashing out, like putting, like it's the kind of the way I do it is like, the way I rationalize it is that if I have to put a lot of effort and and time into it, gotta pay. But if it's very simple and I can like literally answer your question in a word, then I'm gonna just do that. You know what I mean? And then that's the kind of stuff people are upset at. And I always say it like this: if your business plan cannot beat like a Google search, you need a new business plan. If somebody like me can answer their question in 2 words and then give them like literature to back it up in 5 minutes, then I'll do that. And I think they deserve that, because if it saves one person, from like buying something they don't need, like using a compound they shouldn't, inhaling a compound that they shouldn't, and it was worth it. And socially, I come out better for it, and they come out better for it, and we all come out better for it. Because somebody's not going to get some exotic cancer 20 years down the line because they didn't get any information. They decided to use some fluoramide. Right? So, I appreciate the compliment, Cannabis Gardens. I'm noticing that a lot of people are enjoying the free advice and the free information, because I just think it's really important people get it. So yeah, I do appreciate that other people appreciate it, and like I always say, if you can give back, there are ways that you can give back. I appreciate it, but you know, I'm not going to require it except in certain cases where like I'm not going to like take out an afternoon. You know, it's literally my profession and job to do that. So, but yeah, what we're all paying for is the collective sort of negative impact of like pesticide misuse for the consumer and for the person using it. So that's really important, and it's something I'm passionate about. I'm not going to let like that sort of a thing keep me from helping people out. We would love to do a live with you. Yeah, absolutely. Probably better to do it when I don't have a frog in my throat, or 5. Yeah, but I would definitely be down with that. Absolutely. And if other people have questions or things like that, I always get questions from people. And I get pictures and videos, and like again, like people will be like, "What is this?" And I'll be like, "Oh, that's a mold mite." "What is this?" "Oh, that's a springtail." You know, and they're freaking out. They're thinking it's some pest, because most people aren't bug people like I am. And I often have to like, I try to be aware of this, and usually I am, but you know, you get insulated. What is obvious to me and basic knowledge for me it will be always advanced or esoteric knowledge to a new person, first and foremost, and a person who doesn't do bug stuff. So So sure, somebody's been doing it for 10 years, may know what a spider mite is, or may know what like a springtail is, and that's good. But there's constantly it's going to be new people, so it's like, you know, the September situation is always going to happen. There's always going to be newer people. There's always going to be an influx of people who are learning, or for the first time, or they're trying to build on their previous knowledge base. I also do educational presentations, and I also do presentations and training as well, which I think is just as important. Should I be able to see green lacewing larvae? I feel like Arbico sold me plain sawdust. Yeah, you should be, unless it's like only eggs, but even then you would see the eggs. Leaf miners freak people out a lot. Yeah, the damage looks really bad, doesn't it? You know, citrus leaf miner or serpentine leaf miner. Yeah, definitely. If they can skeletonize your plants if you're not careful. Can you plug YouTube one time for spelling purposes? Yeah, I can. It's Zenthanol. I'm probably going to stop this video pretty soon because my voice is ragged. And I don't have any more tea left, so I'm going to make some more tea. Not weak tea, though. My YouTube channel, where this video is going to be, is called Zenthanol, Zenthanol. If you're watching on YouTube, you're probably already there unless someone stole the content. You'll know it because it's like there's an icon, it's a symbol, it's Zen or Chen. And I talk about it on my Instagram all the time. So check it out. If you want to support me on Patreon, you can do it. There's a lot of benefits for that too. I'm not gonna take that support and not give you something back in return. And if you want to tip me on PayPal or that sort of thing, or ask questions, you can obviously, if you've not already, ask me in the messages and talk to me in the comments in the YouTube channel. So you're very welcome. Happy to help all you guys. Glad that there was a lot of good, positive feedback and information here. Made it worth it. And I'm going to look forward to listening to my voice in the last video. Subscribe. It really helps me out. I don't like to do all of that like the bell, click on the subscribe, like the video, smash that like button, but it does help me out. The almighty algorithm. I realized that I chose a very niche discipline to devote my time to. I'm not going to get super uber famous, probably, doing science bug stuff and plant stuff necessarily, although it has been getting better and better. The reality is that I'm not an entertainer necessarily, or I try not to be, or I try to be entertaining, but it's a lot easier if you're doing a comedy skit to get a whole bunch of shares than sort of dry informational stuff. But I'm working on it. The Patreon is also Zenthanol, Zenthanol. And yeah, so Zenthanol, making educational videos on YouTube, and I'll talk to you all later. Have a good one.